Champaign County Agriculture Today with your host, Dennis Riggs.
Hello and welcome to Champaign County Agriculture Today. My name is Dennis Riggs, your host for the next few minutes as we explore some of the topics of agriculture specifically tuned to East Central Illinois here in the Champaign County and surrounding county area. We've been talking lately a lot about energy. I know you talk about it in your homes, in your businesses. We're going to talk about that today and how, once again, agriculture can be looked to as a solution to that problem, not only for East Central Illinois, but also, quite frankly, the world. Our topic today is biomass, and we have some panelists with us today. They're going to shed some very interesting, both firsthand and research light into some areas of biomass that people really haven't talked about before. First with us today is Steve Long. Steve is with the University of Illinois, the College of ACES, and their crop sciences. Steve, welcome to our panel. Give us a little bit of an idea of your background, where you're from, and what you do at the university.
Well, as you tell from my accent, I was actually born in London, England, and I studied and also taught and conducted research in England for many years, primarily on biomass and mitigation of global change. And biomass in England and many parts of Europe today is a major part of the agricultural industry. I moved here 7 years ago, and we've established a biomass research program here at the U of I.
Now, is that a part of the College of ACES, or is it?
Yes, it is part of the College of ACES and also part of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences.
A very interesting combination. We'll talk more about that. Also with us today on our program is Eric Rund. Eric, quite frankly, we've known each other for several years in the farming segment. Eric's a farmer down in the Pasotum area. Give us a little bit of background of your farming experience and your educational.
Yeah, we still farm on the home farm where I grew up. U of I was up here, studied at the U of I, joined Peace Corps after that, met my wife in Ecuador, learned the language, culture, and so now we're back farming, but we also have some South American connections in that we've been taking groups of farmers to Argentina and Brazil to look at their farming operations. In fact, the reason I got interested in biomass is the last trip we went to Brazil, we looked at their how they accomplished energy independence as far as petroleum imports go, and a big part of that was through biomass. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, very interesting. I'm sure we'll talk more about that in just the future. Well, Steve, we'll start out with you. Let's get real basic here. Biomass. What are we talking about? Can you give us a hands-on experience example of that definition?
Sure. In the context we're discussing today, biomass is usually regarded as basically any plant material that can be used as a fuel. So this can be wood chips, it can be corn stover, straw, and miscanthus and switchgrass.
So it could be several different crops. So biomass is the fodder, you might say.
Yes.
Now, is it the fruit of the plant or the plant itself, or both?
Well, what we're obviously everybody's familiar with corn ethanol, where we can generate that from the seed of the corn. But the interest now, although of course corn ethanol is becoming more and more important, if we look at replacing a large proportion of the petroleum we use in the United States, we have to find other sources as well. And so we're now looking at using more of the corn plant, for example, using the stover that's left, using straw, but also crops which are specifically designed or specifically selected for this purpose. Plants which will produce a large amount of biomass very cheaply with little environmental impact, that we can then convert into ethanol or can convert into other products that will replace petroleum.
Do you see, Steve, as biomass, as far as how it relates to agriculture, do you see the agricultural industry, farmers like Eric or myself, are we the suppliers of biomass or are we the consumers of biomass?
I think very, very much the suppliers of biomass. And
okay.
I think we have a huge opportunity here in Illinois.
Well, Eric, you've seen a lot. You've produced biomass apparently on your farm in one way, or maybe you didn't even know you were doing it. What are the applications for biomass?
Well, applications, the obvious one is the corn ethanol is the way we're using it, the most popular way to convert corn to alcohol to be burned in our cars to replace gasoline. Another obvious one is use the straw for bedding for your animals would be another one. Many uses for biomass as mulches and so forth, but in the context we're talking about here today, the only one that is used in any amount now in the U.S. is using corn to produce alcohol for gasoline replacement. A lot of work being done to replace the corn with straw, miscanthus, corn stalks, something else to start a cellulosic process, which is, we're talking another topic here now, but you can actually convert the mass itself to ethanol with the right processes. It's just not economical as we stand today. But in other countries, they are using the biomass for fuel production, for energy production. And I'd defer to Dr. Long on that. He knows more about that than I do.
Well, we've got some pictures. Steve, you're nice enough to bring some pictures along today. We're going to go to picture number 1 here, which shows a gentleman holding several objects. I'm almost confused by, it looks like a hubcap and some other things. We'll get that up on the screen here in just a second. And I want you to explain what that gentleman has got and what is that picture trying to tell us.
Well, yes, he is. That is a hubcap that you can see, and that's actually a hubcap that is made from miscanthus.
Ah, that's the angle, okay.
Essentially, biomass, this doesn't have to be miscanthus, when it's compressed at high pressure, the heat of that will actually melt it, and you can make very good plastic substitutes. So the point of this picture, though, is really to show that just about anything you can make from petroleum, you can also make from biomass. So this is what Texas, or rather Illinois, did not know.
Okay, it's a replacement. Well, we'll move ahead to slide number 2, and as you've mentioned, it's more of the non-traditional ideas of what can be done in agriculture. Slide number 2 is going to show us a little bit more of a traditional look. What's going on in that picture?
Yes, this is actually, this is really another market for these crops, but in Europe it's been found that miscanthus in particular makes very good horse bedding, so quite a few of the farmers who got into generating biomass for energy actually found that they actually got some more money by selling it on as horse bedding. So
now, is this as a replacement to a straw, or is it a supplement?
Yes, it's been preferred to straw actually by a number of the stables in the UK.
Okay.
So.
Well, let's back up for just a second. We've used a couple of terms here that our viewers may not be familiar with, and that's miscanthus and switchgrass. Now, of course, here in East Central Illinois, we're very familiar with corn, soybeans, oats, hay, that type of thing. Steve, could you tell us what miscanthus is? Is it a plant or is it a process?
Yes, miscanthus is a plant. It's a grass. It's, in fact, its growth is very similar to many of our prairie grasses. The difference is, though, that it is very much more productive than our prairie grasses. So it grows to to 12, 14 feet, produces a great deal of biomass as well. But it has the same growth habit. And that is important because what it does in the fall is it recycles its nutrients to the root system. The farmer will harvest this crop in the fall or winter, and so the nitrogen stays behind in the perinating root and rhizome system in the soil. So this has the big advantage that the farmer does not have to add nitrogen to get this large crop. And again, that is important to us in Illinois.
Help me up on the slide that we're looking at right now, slide number 5 here. Now, have I got the right one up? Is that the miscanthus, or is that the switch?
Yes, no, that is a view of miscanthus.
Now, is it planted? How does a farmer like Eric, if he was wanting to grow this, how does that get out in the field?
Well, this is one of the drawbacks. It is sterile. The plant material that's been used in Europe for trials and that we're using here for trials is sterile, because something that vigorous you don't want to get loose. And so that means you have to plant rhizomes, so it'd be rather like planting a potato crop. It is certainly more difficult than seeding.
Okay, now let's switch over from planting it to harvesting it. How is that crop? We saw how tall it was. It's way up above, growing to 12, 15 feet tall. How is that harvested? And Eric, I think you maybe have some insight into that.
Yeah, good question. I've been thinking about that a lot because I think it's going to be one of the crops we're going to be looking at, maybe on our own farm. And so, on the slide you're looking at, someone decided to use a regular silage harvester where they go out and cut the plant, chop it into small bits, and then blow that into either a wagon or truck trailing along beside. That's one way to do it. How you would store it after that, large amounts, I'm really not too sure yet, or transport it to a power plant, say, for example. I think that eventually we're going to go out and we're going to bale it up. I think most people have seen these big round bales sitting in a field once in a while. Their machine goes out there, you cut it, put it in windrows, come out with this baler, and it rolls it up into a round bale. It's round, so it sheds water. You can leave it set outside. It won't spoil. Because you, like Dr. Long said, you harvest this in the wintertime, it's not a time when you normally use your equipment, so that's, or your time as a farmer. You're not busy that time of year. It has an advantage that way. Go out, roll it up, set it along the edges of the field. Truck comes along, semi maybe, with a conveyor or an arm, forklift, pick it up, put it on the truck, haul it to the power plant. That's kind of the way I envision this, but I also know that, necessity is the mother of invention. I think we're going to invent things to haul huge amounts of this biomass as the need arises, as the profitability is there, if you will. We'll figure out a way to do it. But for now, I think we're going to use big bales.
We're going to move ahead to slide number 4 that shows kind of the cycle. And I got to ask this question. As a farmer, is this a plant that's planted every year? Is it grown in conjunction with other plants? Can you grow miscanthus one year and corn the next, or do you devote a field to miscanthus? We have a kind of a growing cycle there in slide number 4.
Right, yeah, it's a, this is one of the things that we're not going to be, it's not going to be like corn where you decide to plant corn this year instead of beans. You make that decision almost before you run the planters. This, you're going to have to use a little more foresight because, like Dr. Long said, it's sterile. You got to take little bits of the root and plant them about every square 30 inches thereabouts, and it'll grow. And in 2 years, you can go back and dig that up and divide those roots, and then you can plant 10 acres from the first acre you planted. You wait 2 years, dig it up, and you plant 100 acres from that 10 acres and so forth. So it's a long-term, you got to have a long-term outlook, or you're not, in 4 years, if you want a crop, you're going to have to start getting busy now, if you will. And so this is a different way for farmers to start looking at this. And it's going to take, it's not a non-traditional crop, and farmers are very traditional here in this part of the world. And first of all, you got to overcome it's a non-traditional crop. Then you got to overcome the fact that it's a long-term investment. Mm-hmm. So, in that sense, it's quite a bit different than our traditional corn and beans we plant around here.
Sounds like it's something that we in agriculture, especially as production farmers, need help from the university. And Steve, I know there's research going on. Give us a little bit of idea what research is being done on miscanthus at the U of I.
Well, we're conducting trials across the state. We have 8 different sites where we're growing both miscanthus and switchgrass to really find out how these crops yield on different soils, how they compare, how the north compares to the south, the east to the west.
Tell me about the usage of it. We're talking maybe as a biomass fuel. Are there other parts of the world, and I know you've got more of a global perspective on this to answer this question, are there other parts of the world that are already using this as a fuel source?
Yes, there are other parts of the world. Denmark and the UK in particular are using it as a fuel source. The biggest outlet in those countries, though, is to actually use it to burn in power stations, and in Denmark also for home heating and even local area heating as well.
Well, let's now switch to the other crop that we've alluded to a little bit today, and that's switchgrass. And Eric, I believe you're going to maybe give us a little bit more of an explanation. Yeah. Do we have a slide of that to show also of the switchgrass?
You got a comparison. I think it's a real good one. Number 7.
Number 7 is a comparison. Okay, let's get slide number 7 and tell us about switchgrass and how it's different from miscanthus.
Switchgrass is a native grass or some of the varieties are native. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Of this part of the world. It's not sterile. It can be planted from seed, but its drawback is it only yields about a fourth to a third or half of what switchgrass is, miscanthus will yield.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a long-term source of biomass, it pales in comparison to miscanthus. It came to notoriety, I guess, from President Bush's State of the Union address when he referred to switchgrass as a source of fuel for our automobiles, replacement for petroleum. And it kind of got a jump start that way, but I think in the long run, it will not be the crop of choice for the purpose of producing quantities of miscanthus or quantities of biomass to replace corn for ethanol. I think that's what we're all getting at right now. That's the topic of choice in the next 5 years will be how are we going to make ethanol.
You know, as I look at what we're talking about here and I see the crops growing in our slides, of course, most of us in this area are experience of biomass fuel, quite frankly, is a wood stove or a fireplace, where we've gone out and we've got the trees behind us, we've cut them down, we've split the wood, and we've burnt them. Steve, am I off by saying this is just more of a fast-growing tree, or how is this different from the biomass of burning wood?
Well, of course, if you are going to combust it, then it's not very different from wood. It's not as convenient as wood, but what we have actually, one of the things we've been experimenting with at the university is making pellets from the miscanthus and from switchgrass, and so you can burn those pellets in a pellet stove. And in fact, one of our economists has calculated, say for a farmhouse, if they devoted a small area to switchgrass or miscanthus that was then pelleted, they had one of these stoves with a pellet hopper, that would, including the loss of yield from the land that's now in switchgrass or miscanthus instead of corn, it will be about a quarter of their current natural gas bill. So we're actually experimenting with that on one of the university's buildings and another farm building out in Christian County.
Mm-hmm. We have seen the use of corn itself in stoves. There are actually corn burning stoves. How would that be different from the switchgrass or the miscanthus?
Well, it would actually, it's a very similar idea. You're using these pellets instead of the corn grain. At present, corn is at a very, very low price, and we don't really believe this is going to be profitable in the long term to burn corn grains, but for something like miscanthus or switchgrass, it should be well into the long term.
We're alluding to corn, maybe because Eric and I know it a little bit better maybe than these two other crops. There's talk about the corn stalks being used as a biomass. Are we talking about corn stalks prior to harvest? Or are we talking about post-harvest? Eric, what have you heard about that?
Yeah, number of things, and all of them don't bode well to use corn stalks as a source of biomass. Number one, if you can't, or you probably really shouldn't take all the stalks off a field once you've harvested the grain, because it unlike miscanthus, you're going to take a lot of nutrients with it, and you're going to hurt the soil structure if you take too much off. I heard a fellow in Chicago at a biofuels conference say, once anything hits the dirt, we don't want it for cellulosic processes, because you can't have dirt in with the enzymes that make the ethanol, because that won't work. So your tonnage that you would get off, say you harvested half a corn stalks off a field that had been harvested already for corn, would be so low that it wouldn't pay for the equipment. Can I lay out an idea on how miscanthus and corn may develop to complement each other?
Sure. You've seen this happen. I'd like to hear your input.
Well, I haven't seen it happen. This is just an idea, okay? The way I know the way farmers react, because we don't tend to move too quickly to new ideas. We're a little slower, because Grandpa didn't do that way. We're not going to do that way. And yet I also see 4 ethanol plants being proposed within 40 miles of me. So how are you going to power and the way we make ethanol now, we go out and we strip the kernels off the cob, bring it in, we buy natural gas, boil water to make ethanol. Well, there's a lot more things you can boil water with than expensive natural gas. So let's say, for example, we start an ethanol plant, and to get it going, we do it the way everyone else is doing it. We're going to use natural gas. We get the ethanol paid off, and now that company has more confidence. And now we're going to say, okay, our next boiler is going to be what is called a fluidized bed boiler. That's the kind of boiler that'll burn anything. It'll burn coal, it'll burn miscanthus, it'll burn garbage, it'll burn corn, it'll burn the DDGs that we're trying to get rid of as a byproduct of ethanol production. Burn all of these things.
Explain that. DDGs.
DDGs is dried distillers grains. It's a process that what's left over after you distill ethanol or corn into ethanol. It's now used for a feed, and which is a good feed, but with basically half our corn production going to ethanol, if we can proceed on as we're doing, we're going to have so much of this stuff that we can't use enough of it for feed. Because hogs can only eat so much. It's got to be fed to ruminants to use it all. Well, so what are you going to do with it? Well, you can burn it for about 2/3 the cost of natural gas if you have the right boiler. Mm-hmm. So why buy natural gas, take it out of homes, take it out of other sources we need natural gas for? Let's just burn the DDGs. It's already in there. One scenario. Another scenario is eventually we're going to go to cellulosic ethanol, which is making ethanol directly from miscanthus, anything cellulose. That's coming. And it's going to come, I feel, because if you put 1 unit of energy in with corn, you get 1.5 units back out when you use it for ethanol. With cellulose, you put 1 unit of energy in, you get 3 or 4 back out. So it's very efficient. So just the efficiencies and the money, the profit, is going to drive us towards looking for biomass to convert to ethanol. But it's not going to happen instantly, because our theoretical ethanol plant is not going to put in this expensive boiler if it doesn't have a source of biomass. And the farmer's not going to plant the biomass unless he's got a buyer for his biomass. So we're kind of in a catch there. A good spot for seed money from a university, from a government program, for something like that to get this going. And the way to get it going is not convert it directly to cellulose right away, but grow this biomass on 100, 1,000 acres and burn it in this fluidized bed boiler. And in that sense, we're going to learn how to grow miscanthus. We're going to learn how to bale it like we don't know for sure. We're going to learn how to handle it, transport it, burn it. And then when cellulosic comes online in 3 or 4 years, we'll have our theoretical ethanol plant is going to have already established its source of biomass. So he's going to have a leg up on the competition. And the farmer's already growing it. They're going to have remember I said it takes 2 years before you can dig it up and multiply it again? Well, they're going to have about 2 or 3 years jump on the neighbor. So they're off and running. So this is the scenario I see that I'd like to see get going. I'd like to see whether it's a program through Soil and Water Conservation, NRCS, FSA, some way this helps environment, it helps general community, it helps farmers. It's a good program, I think.
Well, Eric, you've laid out some very good philosophical and actually financial reasons why this should be laid out. People need to realize, too, that this area didn't always grow soybeans. That was a crop that was introduced, something new many years ago. And, of course, if we go back to our elementary school teachings of the Pilgrims and corn, corn was not necessarily something that they grew all the time, too. Both our normal crops now maybe weren't normal many years ago. Steve, I'd like to ask you, Eric's laid out some areas here. What about the environmental side? What are the benefits of switchgrass and miscanthus as a biomass fuel?
Well, there are several. One of the most important is the fact that these crops need no or very little nitrogen added to them. So that would certainly benefit our sort of rivers in Illinois as well, which has been a major concern over recent years. And of course, it's also a financial benefit to the farmer if they're not having to put on nitrogen at the prices we've seen this year. The crop provides cover for a much longer period than, say, a corn crop. So the ground is really covered from about May right the way through into December. And so this is, of course, preferred by wildlife. Birds can complete their nesting cycle in there and so on. So there is that benefit as well. Both of these plants are so vigorous when they grow in the spring that they just shade out any weeds. So there's no herbicide applied to these crops. And Miscanthus at present has no insect or fungal pests, so we're not actually adding any chemicals to this crop. So they're the major local benefits. Of course, certainly in Europe, they see this as having a major global benefit, that if you're creating your energy from something like miscanthus or switchgrass with very little energy input to cultivate it, you're offsetting a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And so you're slowing the rate of change in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
Well, there's some great benefits. Those all sound good. Surely there's got to be a couple of concerns that we need to watch out for. What have you seen so far of areas of concern, other than the non-traditional idea of the crop?
Well, one of the major questions that we receive about miscanthus is, well, this is so vigorous. Is it going to become another kudzu, something that's going to invade all of Illinois? We're absolutely certain that will not be the case. There are two reasons for this. One is the fact that this is a hybrid between two species. So it's like crossing a horse and donkey and having a mule. The result is something which is completely sterile. It's also the same technology which is used in the banana that you buy in the supermarket. A fertile banana has a seed which is like a bullet. If you've ever bitten into one in a tropical country, for example, you run the risk of breaking a tooth. And none of the major banana manufacturers have ever been sued for this. So we're pretty convinced that technology works. I also say that Denmark and Sweden, which are probably known around the world for being environmentally very cautious, have both approved this crop and have long experience with it.
Well, it sounds like something we definitely need to keep an eye on. Maybe in 20 years when our grandchildren view this program, they can say, well, gosh, you were thinking about that back then, but it hasn't completely been there. So wrapping up here, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for being with our program. Eric, thank you for your perspective as a farmer on the program. And Steve, thank you for your, and continue luck in research at the University of Illinois. I hope things move forward there. That is an interesting look at biomass here on Champaign County Agriculture Today. Once again, what we're trying to do is give you some information to help you make your decisions about where you get your energy and, quite frankly, what you think about agriculture in the future, that we can be the solution to many problems that we all experience today. We'll hope you tune in again next time we present these issues on Champaign County Agriculture Today. Thanks for watching. My name's Dennis Riggs.
Champaign County Agriculture Today is brought to you by Champaign County Farm Bureau.